Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review. This one is for Betrayal Legacy. This is a game that we've played, 13 or 14 different times?
13 sessions, yeah.
And one tutorial section that you kind of learn the gameplay. So today we're obviously going to try to steer away from spoilers, if at all possible. We're going to talk about the differences between Betrayal, the original Betrayal, and the Betrayal Legacy, and then we're going to get into our pros and cons with the game. So, Ryan, you've played Betrayal probably the most out of all of us.
Yeah, I've played a lot of Betrayal. Well, first of all, so for those who haven't played Betrayal, the game is pretty simple in that you are moving around this mansion, exploring rooms, and you're drawing rooms off of a stack. What's cool about this version is it introduces the outdoors. So that's one more region. You can explore the ground floor, the upper floor, the basement, or the outdoors, which adds a whole new set of tiles to the game that you didn't have before. And really, it seems like a little thing, but it gives you a whole nother area to explore, like a whole nother huge thing to do.
It's a lot more design space, too, because now you can have haunts that are outside, which is kind of cool.
And that's another thing, too. You'll notice events and items, which were part of original Betrayal. Now, these items and events only trigger in specific areas. So if you're outside, you get an outside event. If you're in the basement, you get a basement event. One of my biggest complaints about the original Betrayal was that for a game so thematic, you could be on the ground floor and draw a card about being in a cellar. And it's well, this doesn't make any sense thematically.
Right.
So they did kind of sort through that. It also makes it more interesting because these events can be tailored to your situation.
Well, it's cool, too, because as you start to play more of the game, you start to learn where certain items can be found.
Yeah.
If you find something and you give it a name, you know that by searching in the ground floor, you're more likely to find that than going outside, obviously, because it may not be in that location.
Yeah, and that's another new thing they added in Betrayal Legacy are these heirlooms. Now, when you draw certain items, you can heirloom them, which you take a little sticker off of a sticker sheet, put your sticker on there, and give it a name, which is really cool because that item is then going to go back into the deck at the end of that session, and it's going to be just randomly within there, so other people are going to find your item that you named in later playthroughs.
And those heirloom items are really cool, too, because they give you perks if it is your heirloom.
That's
so you
right.
have a little extra special ability on top of that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about just our experience overall before we get into pros and cons. As we said, we've played through this 14 times, including the tutorial. This is a legacy style of game, so if you're not familiar with that, it is a campaign, and the more that you play the game, the more things you're going to experience through the course of the game. The game is really cool, too, because unlike the original game, which the haunt was always introduced at very specific times, in the chapters here, the haunts are introduced at very random times, and it really depends upon your ability to find omen tiles and be able to do very specific triggers within the game, which is new to this as well. So it kind of tailors your experience as you go through the campaign.
Yeah,
and
some of them are the same as sometimes you're just rolling dice.
And the further that you get through the campaign, too, you're going to find a lot of divergent roads, too. Like in the original Betrayal, you had very specific things that you were doing, very specific scenarios. And this one, something you do at point A could lead to point C or D, depending upon your actions in that. So after we've played this now 13 times, I would suspect that our experience is going to be vastly different than other players who have played the game.
Yeah, and we should mention now, of course, this is what you see in front of you are kind of the starting components.
Kind of, yeah.
A lot of these cards, like the event deck and the item or the location deck, they're pretty huge because we've found all the new tiles.
Right.
But new tiles and new cards are going to be added all the time, or not, based on the decisions you've made. And there are also a lot of cards and mechanics and tokens and secret things that I don't want to mention that are going to be in the board as well. So this is not nearly everything that you're going to uncover through the course of the campaign.
All right, let's get into our pros and cons, because we'll talk more about the actual game as we talk about our experiences. So, this is your first time playing any Betrayal game.
Correct.
And it's your first time playing a legacy game, too.
Yes.
So this is a lot to take in for you.
It was.
What's your feeling overall, just an overarching feeling about the game?
I mean, it was incredible. I really enjoyed it. Just being able to build something over time and having your decisions really having an impact, like, for instance, choosing to heirloom an item or not. Do I do it now? If I don't, I'll lose that opportunity to do it. That was a big deal. Thinking through, just all the different possibilities of what we're going to do, and then just the fun parts of naming your character and if you're going to keep the same character or not, depending on what happens to the character throughout the campaign.
That's a really cool aspect too.
Yeah.
In this game, and I'll point to mine, at the start of the game you're going to have your own board that's going to mark all 4 of your different tracks. But on the back side, you have kind of a family chart. And this takes place from 1666 all the way to 2004. So obviously as you play the game, some of your family members might die, and you're going to actually write the family history on here, the age of their death, whether or not they were a traitor or not, whether or not they lived or died. And if your character lived, you could take that character over to the next game, depending upon their age, of course, and follow that family history through, which is really cool because as you start to play the game, you start to get purely invested in your characters and what they're doing, and you start to write stories and interact with what the other people are doing in the game as well.
Well, and that's a really cool part of the game that I really enjoy, is almost brings a role-playing aspect to the table. Now, there's nothing mechanically that's telling you make up a story, or it doesn't have any benefit, but for example, my character was a priest, and one of the first items I found was a Bible, which of course, like, so I named, it's his, like I put, it's his Bible. And like, in future sessions where I found his Bible, I'm like, well, this is my great-great-great-grandfather's Bible that we found somewhere in this house.
Right.
And it makes these cool story moments that are not at all mechanical, but that just add into that narrative and like make it feel like a living,
super
breathing
immersive
history. Right.
Right. One of the things I'll mention as one of my pros is that I've played a lot of Legacy games.
Yeah.
I played Gloomhaven, I played Pandemic, Charterstone. This is the first game that I've played that truly introduces new content every single time you play the game. And by that I mean you get new items, you get new omens, you get new floor tiles. Sometimes you'll, depending upon the haunt, you'll go back to cards that have previously existed from a previous haunt, and you'll check them off, like little check boxes on the cards, which means the next time you find that card or someone finds that card, it does something new in the actual haunt itself. So this game, consistently, every single haunt that you play introduces new content. And that's awesome. I mean, it's really, really immersive when that happens.
I mean, it's super narrative driven, and the whole time over this 13 sessions, you're experiencing kind of a meta plot that's carrying over the entire history of the house. And a lot of that meta plot is hidden within things you'll find around the house, people. You'll be introduced to different people you can talk to and interact with. There's some unique components I'm not going to talk about that are going to be a surprise, that reference even like the prehistory that takes place like hundreds of years before the story, and all this kind of accumulates in like this crazy rich narrative.
Yeah.
I think something that I really liked was that I never played Betrayal, and I could play this game. It didn't, having no previous knowledge of Betrayal other than that it was a game that existed, didn't impact my play or enjoyment of the game at all whatsoever. It actually helped build up something that made me more interested in playing Betrayal so that I know more about the story later.
Mm-hmm. One of the cool things too that I really enjoyed about it was that, or one of the things that worried me as well was, I figured as you play the game, you become familiar with the tiles that are there, and I felt that initially that the game would become boring over time because you'd be visiting the same locations, the same room tiles, but actually it added to the enjoyment of the game because each time that you play a game, it randomizes the way that you get those tiles because you're always searching from the top of the deck and trying to find new locations. And the way that you place these into random rooms, it really randomizes the game immensely each time that you play it. Not only that, but the tiles are going to get stickers on them for certain things that happen. So locations that something nefarious has happened in, it becomes, again, another immersive plot line in the game. Like if I've killed someone in a very specific location, it's going to add something to that room that's going to empower that room in later scenarios. So it's really cool as you play the game. One of the rooms I'll mention is it's the collapsed room.
I was thinking that same thing.
It was always worrisome to travel the upstairs and the ground floor because you knew that you could find this collapsed tile that would throw you into the basement. So there was always that caution about going through the deck and trying to find that. And it was always a point of contention, like, do I want to search the ground floor? Because I know something bad's going to be in the
if you're
basement
outside,
forming.
you know you're not collapsing in the room, you know.
And there's a lot of those tiles in there that you become really familiar with the more that you play the game. And again, I was really worried about that the first time, but as I said, you're constantly getting new tiles, so you may find them, you may not find them, but when you do find them, it's really cool because you're like, I've been there before, I've done this before.
Well, and there's actually, it becomes an element of comfort too. When you flip over a
absolutely.
room, you know, you're like, okay, well, at least I know nothing crazy is happening in this room because I've been here before. Now you're going to draw an event or whatever, but like, there's specific rooms you're always hunting for, like an armory that gives you weapons and things like that, and you're like
secret passages.
or like you'll find, you know, kind of where you want to get those secret passage tiles out so you can move around the manor a little quicker. So there's a lot of cool like Easter eggs too hidden within all those tiles.
The other cool thing I'll mention are the haunts. We played through obviously the game comes with multiple different books. You have books for the survivors. You have books for the traders. You have a bleak journal, which we don't have in here. That is going to walk you through some of the story elements. But the haunts that we did experience are extremely varied, and we only played through, out of the 14 sessions, maybe half of those.
Well, you play through one haunt per session, and we played 13 haunts. There are 50 in the book.
Yeah.
So
depending upon, again...
there's a lot that we didn't play.
Yeah, depending upon your actions in the game, they're going to lead to different points within the story. So there's times in the game you're going to be ripping up tiles because something has happened very specifically in that room. Or when you get a new plank of tiles, you're only introducing one of those tiles because it ties into the previous storyline of the house.
Yeah, that ties into one of my biggest pros when it comes to this game, is that when you're done, you have a living, breathing, completely unique copy of Betrayal that you can then play over and over and over again. The event deck and the item deck aren't changing anymore, but like that's no different than going and playing the old Betrayal.
Yeah.
Except this time, when I go over to your house and play your Betrayal, I'm going to see items I've never seen, encounter events I've never encountered, even find rooms that I've never been to, which is completely cool. So it becomes a question like, well, whose Betrayal are we playing tonight? Everybody bring your Betrayal. We'll see how different they are.
Yeah. And the haunts are also very varied, too. The ones that we experience, there's ones where we're all working together, we think. There's ones where we have, obviously, different types of things that you're trying to do within the game. So, you guys have any other pros before we get into negatives?
I mean, I could talk endlessly about pros. This was, like you said earlier, this is the best legacy experience I've ever had.
I would agree. I think it's also in your only experience. So.
Yeah, it's my only experience, and I mean, I'd have to say, like, it set the bar pretty high for whenever I play another legacy game. And honestly, I just really had a lot of fun. It was very tense at times to play. I love feeling that immersed in a game.
There were so many moments where you draw a new card and read it, and you're just like, what? Like, and there was just these moments where like everyone at the table just like was like a shock or like laughter. Like there's a lot of shared epic frustration, like a lot of shared epic emotions that come from these cards and events and omens and things like that.
And remember, these pros are only covering the things that are non-spoilery. There's a lot of other things that we could show you components for or talk about that we just don't want to talk about here because they are pros, but they're things you want to experience as you play the game. So, negatives. The game obviously is going to have some negatives as well. The pros for me far outweigh the negatives in the game.
By far. But it wouldn't be fair to ignore them either.
No. So, actually, I did some research. I went back to my 2011 Betrayal video that I did a long time ago, and the components really have not improved. They're still very flimsy cardboard. The cards are okay. There's not a whole lot of graphic design on the cards themselves. That would be a negative, especially the miniatures. They look awful. I mean,
that's
they're
my biggest negative.
No detail.
In today's date of 2019, you would expect more out of the miniatures in the game. However, this is a game that's a legacy game. Things are going to get ripped up. Things are going to be discarded and thrown away. So I can forgive that because the gameplay is there to back it up.
Now, I will say the number one criticism of Betrayal, or like the original Betrayal, was that the sliders didn't stick. They fixed that, so at least we do have.
They do fit, but now they're almost
they're a little
impossible
too
to slide.
tight,
Right?
Yeah, they had to like have a trick to move them a little bit, kind of like move them off, but not all the way, and then slide them and then push them back down is like the best way to do it. But for me, I think the miniatures were my biggest thing, and not just because I get that they're simplified because of the type of game it is, but the fact is that you're using these miniatures throughout the game and you're aging your character up, and it was very limiting. You start off with 5, that's no spoiler, it's just the beginning, that you can choose from. There's 3 male characters and 2 female characters, and so there's a little girl and a grown-up girl who don't look anything, don't have similar features. So if you're aging up, it's like, oh, now my hair is red. There's a priest that's very specific, and then a very little girl and a boy with a torch. So the variety there as you're aging the characters up, it's kind of like
you kind of lose that immersion.
Yeah, just a tiny bit, but minor overall, honestly, in the grand scheme of it.
My biggest con or complaint is something that does actually carry over from the original Betrayal, and I don't know what they could have done to address it. They do mitigate it a little bit, but some of the haunts are just very anticlimactic. There are moments when you introduce a haunt and set up the haunt, and the traitor is 2 steps away from completing it, or just has a very easy
advantage from the start.
Or sometimes you get a huge advantage going into these haunts, and balance issues are going to be there in a game like this, because you don't know who's going to end up being the traitor. You don't know what the haunt's going to be or what the objective is, and sometimes the board placement can make it very frustrating. I remember one in particular where I was the traitor and you guys almost just could not complete the objective simply because of the way the board was laid out.
Yeah, that's one of my negatives too, is that the way that the house is built out before the haunt begins is going to steer the direction of that haunt itself. And there's times where the haunt is incredibly difficult to accomplish depending upon how that house is built out. One example was we had a chute that was allowed people to move down to the basement, and you could just slide your monsters directly down there because they were spawning right next to it. And there's really nothing we could have done. We were in the wrong location at the wrong time. And thematically thinking about that, yes, it's unsatisfying as a gameplay element, but that's the way the house was built out. I mean, that's the legacy portion of the game. So I can, again, that's something I can forgive because I know that my experience may be different than someone else's, and that haunts as overall fell on the other side of that. Like, they were super satisfying. There's a lot of variety to what you're trying to do, but the ones that didn't land were probably because of the way that the house was formed.
There was one specifically where I was the traitor, and right before there was something that had happened that gave you more ability in one thing by so much that it made it very impossible for me to be a good traitor. And also the other piece was that the house hadn't been explored enough. So several of the rooms that were needed were not out yet. So do I focus on the one room that's available to me, or do I continue to explore to try and mitigate this overpowered people trying to work against me? That was probably, I remember being very frustrated after that, but at the same time, after the haunt was over, you're like, okay, well, that was the story of that particular year in the house. So and how did that impact the next year? So frustrating in the moment, but overall, it added to the overall satisfaction of the gameplay.
Players of Betrayal are gonna know that.
Yeah.
But it's, some of these haunts aren't super long, and then no matter what happens, you're driving the story forward no matter who wins, and you're still moving on to the next haunt. So frustrated, yes, but you're going to quickly forget that when you're punching tiles and adding new cards and moving on to the next part of the story, right? So it's not a game-breaking complaint by any means.
2 more negatives. One, I'm going to piggyback off your pro where you said at the end of the game you can play the game as a standalone version of the game. I don't know if I would ever do that, because I feel like even after playing the game through once and playing it 14 times, I would want to buy a new copy and go through it and try to experience those haunts that I haven't experienced in the past, because that's the true lure of the game to me, is finding those new tiles, introducing those new tiles, events happening in different ways, opens coming out in different ways, naming those differently, and just experiencing it from a different perspective than what we originally experienced it. Because if I want to play Betrayal, I might just go play the original Betrayal. I don't know. Either way, I want to go through the game as a whole itself. Now, the other thing I'll say before you guys can comment on that is my other negative, and that's that as you play through the game, there's some rules, and this is probably just because the immense amount of content with the journal itself, we're kind of left for interpretation. We found some instances where we weren't quite sure what specific things meant, and that's probably because there's so many words written in here, and a lot of the rules are dependent upon the actual haunt itself. So we've had to go to the designer and say, hey, what does this mean exactly? Because it's not in the rule book, because it's obviously tied to the haunt itself.
And there's a great FAQ on BGG that's spoiler-free.
Sure.
So you kind of go in there, you look for the chapter, and you can click to reveal the spoiler. That helps.
A little bit.
But you're right, there are a lot of ambiguous rules.
Yeah.
And that's it's going to happen.
I mean, I think I'm with Jeremy on wanting to play through it, getting a new copy of Legacy, because for me, there was so much content that we didn't touch. And one of my favorite things about the game, probably hands down, is reading through the the different books. And so I know I kind of like kept the book myself, and I wanted to read all of it because I enjoy that piece. And so there was so much we didn't read.
Oh yeah.
So much we didn't get to, and not to mention, it's not just the books that have all this wonderful story text. The cards have wonderful story text. There's always something new, even if it's just a sentence. There's something, and you're wanting to read it in a voice of some kind. And really, like you said, that RPG element really kind of immerses you in the story. So for me, I'd go back. I don't want to play the.
So now for me, again, to counterpoint that, if I'm going to play Betrayal, I want to play this one, right? Because I might bring in players that didn't play the Legacy version. If we have like David or somebody that didn't play this with us come over, I want to play, like, it's familiar to me. And when I draw an item, it's that memory of like, oh yeah, I remember when Jeremy killed me with this item, or like I remember when Kira found this item and it had an epic moment. So like there's all these memories tied into this version of the game.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool that if you choose to, you can just keep playing this version and keep kind of reliving those memories. You're not progressing any story anymore, but you're still going to have access to the haunts you didn't play through the first time.
Sure.
They just triggered just like they did in regular Betrayal.
So guys, that is Betrayal Legacy, a 3 to 5 player cooperative / competitive Legacy game from Rob Davio. Fantastic experience. I highly recommend this game. MVM approved title, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, make comments below. Share your experiences about the game with us. We'd like to hear about them. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we will catch you guys next time.